Great. So I want to tell you what I am doing and what had me do it. Um, I love interacting with people who are interacting with this whole idea that maybe we could understand ourselves and be more honoring of who we are and what we need, and and then also understand and be more honoring of other people. And there's some things, if you're not familiar with, that we practice around here that came as a result of me starting to study men beginning in 1991. And one of them is the question I began with all those years ago was, what if men are responding to women? And that question arrived when I found out I was a frog farmer, which, if you're not familiar with it, we talk about frog farming in the Queen's Code. And how is it that we manage to bring out the worst in each other? And I was thinking about this just the other day, that it's actually predictable. It's predictable, especially in romantic relationships, because of opposing instincts, that men and women will bring the worst out in each other and potentially be the worst version of themselves in their romantic relationships because of the way that our instincts conflict. So we're not just opposite sexes, we have opposing instincts. And one of the things that happens because of having different instincts and not knowing it is that we will try to figure out why somebody does something, and we will project onto them without knowing it the why we would do something like that. And I had been doing that quite extensively when I found out I was a frog farmer, as in turning princes into frogs instead of frogs into princes. And I started with the question, what if men are responding to women? To find out what was I doing that I wasn't being interacted with by men in the way that I really longed for, and instead got the opposite. And it's relevant to what we're talking about here, because that led from, what if men are responding to women, which I found out ways they are and ways they are not, to what if there's a good reason for that? So what if there's a good reason for everything you do? And what if there's a good reason for what other people do? And if we can see it more clearly and understand it better, we would naturally be more effective in interacting with it. And then that leads to something that I get really wound up about, and I call it false cause. And false cause renders us powerless. False cause renders us ineffective, because we're pursuing why does that happen, and the answer to why does something happen isn't actually true, but it seems true. It really seems true, and we interact with it as if it's true, and then we wonder why we're ineffective. And that's what happens. So one thing that you might want to consider is, if you're not getting where you want to go, or you're not getting what you need in any context of relationship, that the why that you're thinking people do what they do, including you, may not be it. In fact, it probably isn't. So Tyler, who contributes so much through our social media, asked you, some of you a few weeks ago, what questions would you like me to respond to? And we're going to keep pursuing this. He's going to ask you what topics you want me to address, and he's going to ask you what problems do you want me to help you solve. And then we're scheduling me getting to come and interact with you this way on a regular basis. As in, it looks like every 3 weeks, we're going to be able to do it pretty much this same time in the same place. And the question that stood out from, I think there were 40 that were contributed, and just because I haven't answered them yet doesn't mean we're not going to address them. We're doing some distilling because they tend to intersect, and I want to make the biggest difference. And this one is about love bombing. And I want to read it to you exactly how it was put, because that's what I've been interacting with. is this question as it was presented. And I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the person who asked it, but they asked, is love bombing, in parentheses, ever a good thing, or is it always considered bad? Can it be genuine? So that was the question. And I hadn't heard of love bombing because I don't pay attention to things like that. And so Tyler did some research to find a definition for me. And he did so much research, we don't actually know where he found the definition. But this is the definition that I started interacting with, and it's directly related to what I'm going to hopefully get to contribute to you. So what it said somewhere was love bombing is when a person showers a new partner with intense displays of affection early on in a relationship. That's the first part of the definition. There's a second part that I'll read in a moment, but I want to start with something I found to be really useful. And that is to, instead of looking at that having been done to us, right? And why did they do that to us? And what was the consequence of that? That it helps if we look at, okay, what if there's a good reason? And one of the places we can find a good reason is in ourselves. So I invite you, for the purposes of this, maybe 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk about it, to think about when you have experienced affection, lots of affection early on in a relationship, or something that you hope to become a relationship. When have you experienced so much affection for somebody that to not get to express it in some way could be a kind of torture? That you have so much affection overflowing for that person that there keeps being ways that you display it and you express it, and that you feel the need to do that. Like, to not get to can be torturous. So I could definitely relate to this. I could relate to it when I met my son's father, and I remember us talking about, has anyone ever loved like this before? We didn't think anybody ever had. And I was 21 at the time. I was 21, he was 25, but it just seemed like it. There was just so much affection for each other. And, one of the intense displays of that was that we got engaged on our third date. And that's an intense display of affection. Let's get married. And we did. Now, what happened after that? Thank goodness it did, or I never would have started studying men, because it pretty much went downhill from there. And like in a bad way, like a downward spiral, like into a sewer. Now, did we get married? Yes. Did we stay together for 7 years? Yes. Did we have our son together? Yes. And years later, we agreed it was worth all the torture, that our son existed was worth it. We'd do it all over again. But what made it that way? I mean, that's what I've been obsessed with, is asking why and how in a way that ends up with clarity, that allows us to act in a way that we can cause a different outcome. So I'm obsessed, you could say, with cause and effect. Most people are. That's why we ask, why did that happen? How did that happen? But too often we get distracted by false cause. We don't ask long enough. We don't dig deep enough. We don't test the answers. We don't verify. We don't try solutions and see if they work. And if they don't work, abandon them instead of thinking it ought to work. What's wrong with me that it doesn't? What's wrong with me with them that it doesn't? But to keep searching for what works. And that's what I've been obsessed with. And many of you know, I think like an engineer, and I reverse engineer and then come up with a better way to put the radio together. In this case, the way that we relate to each other. So I just, for the purposes of this, to get the most out of it, I invite you to think about when you have experienced so much affection for somebody that a display of that could easily be interpreted as intense, and what that was like to feel that. And I'm going to go on to the next part of the definition Tyler found, but I'm asking this question because where I want us to end up with is with the ability to cause affection, that you can actually cause yourself to experience affection for someone. And it's a lovely thing to feel. And I also want you to leave with, by knowing how we do cause affection, even unconsciously cause ourselves to feel affection, that we can also cause ourselves to have discernment. We can also cause ourselves to be wise. And one of the things that I like to say to the folks who interact with me in our Smart Singles Intensive is, go ahead and experience joy, experience connection, experience intense emotion, experience excitement about that other person. But don't commit with that. Don't commit with your emotion. Commit with your wisdom about yourself. So that's what we're always working on, is wisdom. So this leads to the second part of this definition. And so, when I was first reading it, love bombing is when a person showers a new partner with intense displays of affection early on in a relationship. Oh, how wonderful. I was that way with David, right, who became my first husband, although we knew nothing about being husbands and wives. So we weren't really husbands and wives, but we did have a wedding. And then I was that way with Greg, right? And we were together for almost 28 years and in love with each other, literally up to the last moment before he had a heart attack almost 3 years ago. And I mean, seriously intense displays of affection. For him, it was love at first sight. And when I looked into his eyes the second time, I thought, this man loves me. Whoa, right? I knew it. I knew that he loved me. And then when we finally connected and ended up on a date, on our first date, he was talking about our grandchildren. And he's asking me about my dreams. And I told him the truth, what my dreams were, even though I thought they were really risky. Like he might just run away, but okay, I guess if he has to run, he will. And he didn't. He committed to them instead. Oh, it was so funny. Early on, when he talked about us getting married and having been married and been divorced and been engaged again and been all kinds of what felt like burned, to the conclusion that, men are cons. I really decided that men are cons. We come back to that. But when he talked about us getting married, I said, I will marry you when the dirt in the street stands up and says I should. That's how cynical I was at the time. But certainly experiencing a lot of affection. And I love experiencing affection for people. I love being in love with people. So I've spent a good part of the last 30 years trying to figure out, how does it happen and how can you have it happen over and over and over again? And some of you know, most recently, about a year and a half after Greg passed, I met Dan. And holy moly, did we fall in love fast. So much so that we made an agreement, because is a long distance relationship, and the short way through the mountains is 204 miles. Around the mountains is 261 miles. And we made an agreement early on, no structural changes for a year. And, at the time we were talking about no one was going to remodel their house and no one was going to get a U-Haul to move to the other person's house. We were going to take time for this to evolve. But oh my gosh, the affection that we had and the displays of affection and intense, wonderful, beautiful, terrifying, and so fun to be authentic about, to be honest about, like to tell him on our like third day together, saying, can I tell you what the voice in my head is saying? And he's like, yeah. He said, it's saying, can I keep you? He looked at me and said, yes. Like, I wasn't asking you. Goes, well, I'm answering. So lots and lots of affection, lots of being in love. And fortunately, all the work that I've done for the last 30 years, I knew how it had happened. I knew why it had happened. I knew what I was doing that was causing it for both of us. And that's some of what I want to share with you now. Also, that you can cause the affection that you want, but still also have wisdom and not commit with that emotion to a situation that ultimately may not be right for you or the other person, which was something that David and I agreed upon. We weren't the right person for each other. There's all this affection, but we weren't the right person. We had no chance of ever meeting the other's needs, but we didn't know it. And we thought the emotion, the affection, well, love is all you need, right? Wrong. Sorry. Love is probably the easiest part and not all that we need. So my puppy is sleeping beside me. He normally would be with Dan right now, but Dan's out of town. So if you hear him, he's dreaming. I don't know what he's doing in his dreams, but anyhow, that's that funny sound. So I want to read you the second part of this definition, and then we're going to start tying this together, okay? And remember the question, what if men are responding to women? And which then led to me to study women and how are women responding to men and why? But also the question, what if there's a good reason for everything that we do? Which then led also to what if no one is misbehaving? What if no one is misbehaving? It's one of the most important questions I started considering, because thinking that someone is misbehaving is what causes us to be furious. And a man who's been a student for a long time and then is now working for us, his name is Joshua, coined the phrase from furious to curious. So as long as we think somebody's misbehaving, we'll be furious. But if we can bring in the question, well, what if they're not misbehaving? What if there's good reason for what they do? Now we become curious. And curiosity, I would say, is essential to wisdom. So here's the next part. I'm going to read the first part and then the second part, because when I read the second part, I went, wait a second. And that's what had me tell Tyler I wanted to do this. So what it says is love bombing is when a person showers a new partner with intense displays of affection early on in a relationship, period. It's a manipulative tactic. It's a manipulative tactic used in relationships to rope someone deeper into a relationship, which often turns unhealthy soon after. Now, in the research I did about this, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So not good to assume that it is. So to the question of, is it always bad? Can it be genuine? The answer is yes. What causes it to be genuine? What causes it to continue? Because something not continuing doesn't mean it wasn't genuine. That's something that's important. So if you think about the times when you've experienced a lot of affection, when something happens that affection disappears and you may become neutral, or you may actually have really negative feelings towards somebody, does that mean the initial affection wasn't genuine? does that mean that the cause of initial affection was manipulative? What if the affection was genuine? And what if there was no intent to manipulate? What if you had affection for them and your displays are genuine? What if someone has affection for you and they're genuine? Were you really trying to manipulate? And what's interesting about this whole idea is how emotion and this business of to rope someone deeper into a relationship. You know, that actually happens. Intense emotion does rope someone deeper into a relationship. Specifically, it's most likely to rope women deeper into a relationship. But what if that wasn't the other person's intent, either by displaying affection or causing affection? What if there wasn't that intent, but it happens anyway? So this is one of the things I want to unpack. So what causes affection, and what has emotion rope us into relationship, thinking somebody's the one? So these are the things that I want to break down. But as I get to that, like I said before, I had decided that men are con artists. And early on, I decided this. They're con artists, and after they've caught you, they change. And so I thought my strategy in my 20s was, after I left my husband, was to discover, like to reveal the con before I fell for it. So I didn't know it until later I found out I was turning princes into frogs. I intentionally antagonized men. Like I tested them, I poked them, I prodded them, I accused them, I criticized them, I withheld from them, I I told them why they did what they did, and when they said it wasn't true, they never won that argument. I was sure I was right about the reasons that they did things. And so I had a belief that men are con artists. And it isn't just something women think about men. There's a statement that I learned from studying men called bait and switch. And another term I use is false advertising, right? So part of being human, part of being a man and being a woman is the instinct to present to people we're attracted to what we believe will attract them. It's just a natural thing to do, to reveal what we believe to be attractive. So this is how you get men tend to boast, right? They tend to boast about accomplishments and resources and their positions and standings and their importance. Why? Because women tend to be attracted to that and they know it. And so they will present that. And women have a compulsion, and this doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. It's part of our instincts to present perfection to men. We want to appear as flawless, right? So we wear makeup that has us look flawless, and do I look good in this dress? And does this hide my lumpy, bumpy parts? And does this display my assets to their best advantage? Again, it's instinctual. It's not a conscious choice, even though we strategize to fulfill that instinctual compulsion. And is it sustainable, right? Is the boasting real? Is the presentation of perfection sustainable? I remember, because I was committed to not false advertise. There was such a profound sense of resonance between me and Greg that I was, okay, I'm going to be as honest as I possibly can. And I remember getting ready for our first date, and I went to shave my legs. I wasn't wearing a dress. I was going to wear pants, but I went to shave my legs because that's what you're supposed to do when you get dressed for a date. You shave your legs and you paint your fingernails. And as I was about to do it, I asked myself, Alison, are you willing to do this every time you have a date with this man? Are you going to shave your legs and paint your fingernails? And I laughed. I'm like, no way. No, I'm not that person. I'm not that person. I'm a hippie. I was a hippie. And I'm a gardener, and I have a tractor, and I, horses and dirt, and paint my fingernails. What would be the point of that? There, I'm just going to break them and snag them, the next minute. So instead of doing this thing I was compelled to do to false advertise, which would have been a bait and switch, I didn't do it. I represented myself as I mostly am, not as I would be for a special occasion. 30 years, almost 30, 30 years later, to do that all over again. When I met Dan for the first time after falling in love with him on the phone, I felt like those 30 years in between had just disappeared. The compulsion to false advertise, to represent myself in ways that I only am on special occasions was so strong. But I resisted it again. Okay, so whether it's believing men are con artists or believing women are con artists, whether it's bait and switch or false advertising, human beings do it. And it's one of the biggest dangers of online dating. And if I ever create an online dating app, all photos will be date stamped. But just notice how much we think this is a reality. And so we're afraid to feel, we're afraid to have affection. We don't know if it's our affections real or caused by something that's real and lasting, or is theirs. And we may not think theirs is real because we know we weren't real. And so what we think caused it, they're in love with me, but they've never met me, actually. They've met my representative. So the more truthful and real and honest that we are, sometimes called authentic, the more we can rely upon somebody's response to that being authentic, and vice versa. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Another piece of the puzzle is something that we talk about in Sync with the Opposite Sex. And that's a program that I created in 2006, I think, to transform dating for all my friends that were suffering much this life-sucking activity. And that work still stands. And you can get it on our website, complete with like crib notes. So you have the written stimulus to get it in your brain, or you can buy it on Audible. I don't know what they charge for it these days. I don't get to decide that. But this thing that I'm about to talk about briefly, we talk about it more extensively in Sync with the Opposite Sex, and it's the relationship between emotions and the future. And what I realized in listening to men and them talking about what has them commit to a relationship, which they call the right person, right? They're looking for the right person. And we were able to distinguish 12 things that make someone the right person, 12 things. And love is not one of them. Love would be in addition to these things. And we discovered, and I got to see it in myself, and just check this out. If you're a woman, check this out. If you're a man, notice being on the other side of it, that as a woman, first of all, our feelings are in a different part of our body than men. Men wonder, why do women make their feelings the center of everything? Well, it's because our feelings are at the center of everything. And our feelings will like, right? They'll have this surge of feeling, and it can get really, really big. And one of the things that causes that to happen in response to a potential mate is that we're seeing in things in them that mean there's a future with them. So what I got to see was there's a direct relationship between the intensity of the feelings and the perception of a future. So just think about it. If you're like exploring with somebody, if you're, whether you date or not, I don't think dating's required or necessary, by the way, or even that productive in finding a partner. Anyhow, but if you do it, if you meet somebody somewhere, the can I have your number? Or can I see you again? Or next time we get together. Oh, next time we get together, we should do that. They talked about it next time. Well, now you might have just kind of liked someone and sort of observed them and notice if they're your type and do you have chemistry. Now there's this, right? Because they talked about next time. And then if they say things even further into the future, like when Greg talked about our grandchildren, right? The potential for that was huge emotionally, like, oh my gosh. But already I was choosing wisdom, right? When the dirt in the street says I should marry you. So just notice that as it appears there's a future. So they may check off the list. Okay, they're the right religion. They want to get married at the right time. They want to have children or they don't. They have a career that I think will provide for me or support me or be aligned with me in a way that's going to work. So it's checking off things on the list that we think create compatibility, that we create the ideal of a mate for ourselves. Especially as women, the emotion goes, and we will experience affection. We will experience intense feelings. And often what will happen is we'll have this intense, great feeling. And then right after it is this fear. Like, wait a second, I'm having a feeling that's not safe to have. I need to nail down this future that will allow it to be okay to have this feeling. And it's one of the things that has us seek commitment so quickly. And it's one of the things that has us commit so quickly. We're trying to get a commitment from them, make a commitment ourselves. And okay, so you're going to take down your profile and we're going to go steady now. And here's a key to my house. And I've witnessed all of this in myself and other people. And this emotion that causes us to commit to something without, one term you could use is due diligence. We do more research and diligence in observing and expecting a house we might buy or a business that we might engage in than we often do with someone we're considering spending the rest of our life with. So in this sense that the perception of a future with someone creates room for even bigger emotion, we'll experience that. And when it doesn't fulfill itself, we could think that they manipulated us into feeling that and they were trying to rope us into a relationship. But what if they weren't? So in Sync with the Opposite Sex, which is a recording of a live workshop, we talk about something called photoshopping and something that causes mostly men to express the futures that they're imagining while interacting with a woman that they're attracted to, a woman that they think is special. And it's a disaster in the making. So I'm gonna leave that there for now because I have more things I want to tell you, and dang, time passes quickly. Okay, I did that part. Okay, so this is where we get to what you can do about it. This is where we get to the cause and effect, that you can actually cause a different effect. So one word you could use is filtering, and think about how much input we have, how much input we have from our own thoughts, from sensations in our bodies, from our own emotions, from our fears, our concerns, our memories, right? How much input we have from our environment, from the weather, the sound, other people, right? There's so much input that if our brains didn't filter, we would probably end up catatonic. So our brains have to filter. And one of the ways that our brains filter, we might call it thinking. And another way it occurs is what we might call listening. What are you doing? I'm just listening. Well, I'd like you to consider that we're never just listening. That when we're listening, there's usually a question. There's usually a question that's at the top of our mind, and it's often being asked on a loop. And these questions can cause disasters. These questions can cause affection. These questions can cause discernment. They can cause wisdom. And after Greg passed, I didn't expect to ever want to be with anybody ever again. Why would I? A legendary marriage, great love. I mean, seriously, up to the last moment, in love with each other. And why would I didn't even want to start over, do anything again. Why would I do that? And then I was volunteering in a hamburger truck at a county fair. And there was another volunteer, a man I'd never met. And there was this way he was being about volunteering. He was very energetic. He was very proactive. And I liked it. I thought that was really cool. And as I noticed that I liked that about him, the question came into my head, and I didn't notice this question. I only discovered it later when I was unwinding the disaster. The question that was in my head was, well, what else do I like about him? I didn't expect to like anybody ever again. Well, what else do I like about him? And that literally became the filter. Well, what else do I like about him? What else do I like about him? And by the end of spending an evening flipping hamburgers and making hot dogs, there were so many things I liked about him. And they were doing dishes together, and we're cleaning up the trailer together. There's so many things I liked about him. Oh my gosh. The effect that had on me to be listening, what else do I like about him? I was so much in like with him after a couple hours. It was overwhelming. The emotion was so intense, especially because I was grieving, right? So he's even more emotional and susceptible. Well, what do I like about him? What else do I like about him? Those are actually really good questions. If you'd like to feel affection for somebody, affinity for somebody, it's a wonderful question. What do I like about them? But not knowing you're asking it and therefore not balancing, right? Like if I had asked, what don't I like about him? What made us completely incompatible was as obvious, or could have been as obvious in the first, without even actually talking to him, just overhearing him talking to other people. It would have been even more obvious. It would have had me just stay the heck away. He and I live our lives from two completely different places. Whoa, but I didn't know that. It blew up 3 days later. No worries. It was a short stint. But I had this intense affection, and I had big displays of this intense affection that had him head for the hills, even though he was behaving like a man behaves in a relationship, which he didn't know that I was interpreting that as. So the whole big explosion, right? But nobody intended to manipulate the other person. Nobody intended to deceive the other person. We had a good reason, and it was a disaster. So, for example, I've been paying a lot of attention to love and being in love. And love has a lot to do, real love has a lot to do with respect and admiration. And you can actually cause it. What do I admire about this person? What do I admire about this person? You actually listen to them talk about anything, seriously anything, with the question, what's admirable about that? What's admirable about them? You could ask that question and you'll end up finding, like a treasure hunt, something that you admire. What do I respect about him? What do I respect about him? What do I respect about her? You'll end up finding things that you respect. In Understanding Men and in Lux, which are both online courses, we teach what's called listening to learn, which are versions of what matters to them, what do they care about, and what's important to them. When you listen for that, you actually can end up being more discerning. You can actually find out what has them tick, what is the source of their decisions. And then, so how does that fit with what matters to me? Fit matters. How does that fit? How does that fit? And after Dan and I fell in love so quickly, I said, okay, this is cool. Being in love is the easy part, but the real question is, do we fit? And it's going to take a long time to figure that out. And therefore, the decision that we made, no U-Hauls and remodels while we figured it out. And guess what? It was almost a year when a U-Haul got involved. Actually, it was over a year when a U-Haul got involved because the other stuff I brought in my car. But the truth is, we're still figuring it out. It's still up for grabs. Are we a fit? Are we a fit? And will we continue to be a fit? So this discernment and this me looking and listening and eyes wide open is something I keep practicing, as well as what has me respect and admire him and have so much affection for him. It's quite balanced, and it allows us to solve problems without assumptions of manipulation or deceiving or an intent to hurt the other person. We keep getting to know each other a year and a half later and 7 months of living near him. I don't live with him, but I live very near him, 90 steps, 90 of my steps. So you can actually affect what you're feeling. You can affect what you're seeing. You can affect your level of discernment by the questions you choose to have in your head when you're listening to that person, or when you're thinking about that person, or when you're observing that person. And if you balance that with allowing yourself to experience affection and receive affection, then, like she asked, is love bombing ever a good thing, or is it always considered bad? Can it be genuine? Well, my first reaction to love bombing was, love bombing? Isn't that what we need in the world? We need more love bombing instead of hate bombing and disrespect and disregard and dismissal and, crap bombing. Let's have a lot more of that. Well, we can turn it into that it is genuine, but it's also honest and it's real and it's informed. And then you get to trust yourself more. You get to trust your own feelings more. You get to trust your own perceptions more, and you get to trust them. It's awesome. Another question that I would give you while I'm giving you questions is, instead of looking to see, does he fit the list, right, what you're supposed to be looking for, to ask, so am I better off? Am I better off with this person in my life? And not just, am I better off financially? Am I better off because I have higher status? Am I better off because of how people think of me and I look good with this person, him or her? Those are all instinctual, and it's natural to look for those things, but they don't create satisfaction. They don't create fulfillment. They don't create sustainability. But how am I better off? Am I a better person? Am I a better version of myself? Am I a bigger version of myself? Am I expanding because of this person? Am I more true to myself with this person and around this person? And as a result of this person, how am I better off with them than without them? And this may sound funny, won't sound funny to men, but I learned this from men. The 12 things that make someone the right person for a man are all things that have him be better off with that person instead of without them. And while a woman's instincts for connection and protection will cause us actually to commit when we're not totally better off, a man's instincts for conserving his energy and his resources, which he knows are limited, he does make decisions based on better off. And men have been accused of being non-committal because of that. And it's not true. They're completely committal. If you want to know more about that, we talk about it, understanding men. And they have a wisdom that they naturally bring to what and to whom they commit. And because they're really looking, am I better off? And we asked a question once to a panel of men, what would have you not stay with someone that you were in love with? And one man answered, he said, if I wasn't happy. And it had me reflect on how many times in my life I'd been in love with somebody, or sure I was in love with him, but I wasn't happy. Happy is a level of fulfillment that requires so many parts. And do we take the time to make sure there are all those parts before we commit? So yes, I live in his backyard and Dan is my playmate, and we still haven't committed because there's still so many ways to find out if we fit. And we're so in love with each other. We're crazy about each other, but we stay wide awake. And it has us create a foundation for what we're doing that, well, frankly, I'm really proud of. I'm really, really proud of it. Okay. Wow. Well, I thought I had about 20 minutes to say about love bombing and what you might want to do about it. Obviously, I had a lot more, and I'm glad that I got to do it. Thank you for this format that I got to. And a couple things just to tell you if you want to explore these more, and then I'm going to see who has questions. So I already told you about In Sync with the Opposite Sex. That's how you can learn about photoshopping and emotions and how that all works. And also gives you some good questions to ask if you're going to be discerning, like what do you need to give and what do you need to get, and to be paying attention to that. Understanding men, that's probably one of the most important things that I did, is find out the good reasons for everything we do. And they really do have good reasons, like they're really good people. And understanding women, which we as women have really good reasons for the things we do. And we allow ourselves to be criticized because we don't know the good reasons. And that's something I'd like to end, that nobody puts up with being criticized, is if I had it my way. And then Lux, which stands for Liberation, Understanding, and Extraordinary Relationships. It isn't about gender. It isn't about male or female or being focused and committed or open and connected. It's about being human and basic things at the core of how we interact in relationship, and what we try to control versus what we actually control. And we work a whole much more on these questions we're listening with, and the effects that they have on our lives, and the ones that will have us end up in a not good place. Like if you listen to people with the question, what do they need from me? You end up with a whole lot to do. And you don't have to listen with that question. So we work on things like that in Lux. And if you want to find out more about that, you can come to our website. There's a bunch of free stuff and all kinds of cool things you can do. And there's actually something under free stuff, listen, called Unhealthy Men, The Secrets of Early Detection. And love bombing has been associated with unhealthy men and unhealthy relationships. And that audio recording distinguishes what's truly unhealthy versus what's misinterpreted. So that's something you might want to engage in. And in a future one of these sessions, I'm actually going to head into the big nasty word that gets applied to that so many people have on their lips these days. narcissism. I'm going to come back and talk